Hello and welcome to Open Door Salon. I'm your host and Chief Mischief Maker, Lori Ellis. And today I am with two industry attorneys who are following everything going on in the government. And let's be honest, there's a lot. And so I'm not really going to do a long intro. I just want to get into it. So, Colin Zick and Ann Lee, please welcome to the show and introduce yourselves to the audience. Colin, go first.
Right. I'm Colin Zick. I'm a partner at Foley Hoag, where I co-chair our healthcare compliance practice and also co-chair our privacy and data security practice.
Ann.
I'm Ann Lee. I'm a shareholder at Brownstein Hyatt Farber Schreck, managing partner of the New York office, and I co-chair our life sciences practice here. And I was an epidemiologist before I became a lawyer.
Okay, so I have questions. I have a ton of questions. So I think we're first going to start up and then work our way down. And the very first question I have is that right now the Supreme Court is ruling or potentially going to rule on the tariffs that the Trump administration are putting into order. So I'd like to know, what does that mean either way? What does that mean for everything that we're talking about today for the life sciences industry?
I'm actually working on those cases right now on behalf of a whole slew of clients, not just in the life sciences industry, uh, because essentially what's at issue is whether the president can impose these tariffs under the IEEPA statute, right? That's what everyone's talking about. And he's been overturned at the district court level and also at the appellate level. And based on the questions of the Supreme Court, it seems like the US government may not be able to keep the money or keep all of the money. Some portion may have to be returned. And that's sort of what the thinking is. And so then the question becomes really how best to position yourself for this. So it's just so hot off the press already this week. The CIT issued a ruling, the Court of International Trade, that is, at the district court level. There's only one national court for this. Issued a ruling stating that essentially they are the only way to get the money back because it's not an administrative proceeding. You can't file with the government. There's no sort of protest, is what the people usually use. And so the CIT, which is traditionally a small and very little used court, honestly, except very highly specialized, is now going to be at the center of any kind of refund process that has to work. So, in a nutshell, over 300,000 companies and people who have paid these tariffs are going to have to file to get their money back. And so no one is sure exactly what the mechanism is going to be until the court said, well, you can only do it by filing here. And so we don't know what that means going forward. We assume they'll handle it as a class. It's a whole pile of uncertainty is where we are right now.
Colin, as I'm stunned right now, having to
Right.
deal with the process.
It's a whole pile of uncertainty, and yet I'm going to step back because I think, and you've done a great job talking about where we are legally. Um, but I want to talk a little bit about what that means in sort of the practical business sense. And what we see, in a lot of different fronts is that what people said was going to happen hasn't necessarily happened, economically speaking. We see there was an article in the Wall Street Journal earlier this week saying, people thought there was going to be a real spike in inflation because of tariffs. Hasn't happened. And in fact, earlier this morning, we got inflation results which are lower than expected, and the stock market's going up. So, nobody's quite sure what it meant going in that, the so-called Liberation Day was a sort of a mix of different things, and it has had some positive results and it's had some negative results. And now you get the messy business of undoing in some way where we think we're going to head. And that's just going to add more uncertainty. But it seems like the market will be able to quantify that because people will know how much, you'll be able to figure out, okay, they're getting this much back, they're getting that much back. So it may not be, there's a lot of bumps between point A and point B, but it seems like the economy is just going to keep rolling along in the slow roll that it is right now, regardless of whatever happens at the Supreme Court.
Then I have another question, and this is falling into patents. When we look at a case that's like the Supreme Court case right now, and what's happening based on if the ruling is not in favor of the Trump administration and the tariffs, the Trump administration has already suggested perhaps there should be some kickback for patents for anything that's been federally funded. Now, right now, I think it's just a thought, but what are the implications, if there are any implications, about something like that moving forward?
Well, Colin, if you don't mind, I'll take that as I'm actually.
Oh, I definitely want you to take that one
okay.
first, Ed. Yeah, you definitely get that one. Absolutely.
So
I'm waiting for the easy ones.
I can't wait once we get to regulation to sit back and enjoy my coffee. So it's sort of interesting. I think kickback is maybe not the word to use there. So there's a couple of sort of ideas that are on the table. The first was essentially a patent tax based on the value of the patents that was floated, and I haven't heard anything about it since. I think they're not looking at that right now. The second is actually what's old is new again, which would be for government-funded patents. Actually, this is an old statute, the Bayh-Dole statute, where you have to put in a patent that it is in fact funded by the federal government. And to comply with that, what you have to state that you're going to manufacture it here, it's going to be industrialized here. It was a way to sort of boost the economy. But over time, particularly for like pharma patents and life sciences research in particular, it became waivers got granted as a matter of course because we didn't have the infrastructure here to manufacture those things or to exploit them here, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So usually that's what's been happening. So now there's a little bit more of a push to keep that old structure in place and say, if you're going to use government funded patents, we are allowed to make you comply with what you agreed to when you got the funding or you licensed the patents, which is do it here. And so I think that is not a new idea because it's in the original statute, but it's sort of the implementation, the re-implementation is what's on the horizon.
Right. And when you look at Bayh-Dole, I mean, it's hard, some of us on this call may be old enough to remember 1980 when that law passed, and Birch Bayh and Bob Dole. It was pretty revolutionary at the time, but when you think about what's happened in the 45 years since, we've seen an explosion of academic research and follow-on commercialization, which has generally been a very good thing. And it's not, doesn't strike me as unreasonable to keep focused on those principles. It was never the idea that the government's going to give it away. We wanted to use the government-funded research as a multiplier effect. Those federal dollars, they start the ball rolling, and then they're like any other investor, the government wants a little bit of acknowledgement of its contributions. That doesn't seem unreasonable, and if implemented appropriately, doesn't seem like it should chill innovation. And I think that's what you have to look at. We don't, the original legislation didn't chill innovation. Quite the contrary. What we've seen over the course of the last, let's call it 50 years, is the greatest increase in research and development that the country's ever seen. Not that Bayh-Dole is solely responsible for that, but it didn't slow things down, that's for sure. And so I think that's the ultimate thing you want to look at here is let's understand that the concept works and find some way to allow it to be refreshed going forward seems okay.
So then I have a question. Do you see this as a potential way to undo the outcry right now of NIH funding being pulled back? Do you see as like this is an alternative method to manage funding that's going out to academia, or no?
I'll take that one because it's easier, right? No, I mean, I think
Yeah.
everything we've seen from the second term of the Trump administration is to want to manage things more, to have more government control over places, tying things to government involvement, to government money. And it's both positive and negative. We're seeing, literally today the regulatory clearances are coming out about limitations on gender affirming care for hospitals. That's tied to government funding. They're saying you're not going to get our money if you do things that relate to gender affirming care for children. The flip side is if we're trying to promote something, we want our hands in it. You look at the Intel situation. Okay, now you and I, we all own part of Intel. So there's more involvement on both the positive and negative sides. Is it tied specifically to the NIH issue? That's why I don't think so. I mean, it's just part of that continuation of that theme.
So
And
then
if I might, Lori, sorry, just weigh in there quickly. It's not a fix to the NIH thing. That Bayh-Dole Act was always part of NIH funding. You had to just agree to abide by these rules if you were getting funding even from the NIH, any branch of the government that gave it to you. So the issue with NIH funding is much more tied to, as Colin said, control. Who's doing what research is now the shift has changed, has come, and they're pulling back on some things and pulling back, putting more money into other things. So the Bayh-Dole Act will actually just keep on chugging along. I don't think it'll change that very well.
So then let's talk about the idea of control and right now what it's doing to the life sciences industry as they try to adapt and evolve and pivot. What should companies be the most concerned about right now? Colin, that's for you because Anne already did some hard questions.
Yep. I get it. Is it fair to say everything? Because I'm reminded of the movie from what was it, a couple of years ago? Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. Is that the title of it? And it feels like that's where we're at. That they're really just when you think, oh, that's settled, then something new happens in that space. Oh, and it's inevitably things. Oh, we haven't seen that before. And so when you're asking what to focus on, I'm hard pressed to say that there's one single thing. What you can do, and I'll use another quote from the famous New England, or now infamous New England Patriots football coach, Bill Belichick, which was do your job, which is a way of saying control what you can control. And the other stuff is going to be what it is. And put yourself, so this is a time where you want to think back, all right, I can control what we do in terms of our business processes, our intellectual property, those sort of things. We can control that, and that should be as good as it can possibly be. And then we'll be in it. We don't have to think about fixing our own house. Our house is in order, and that enables you to react better to the atmosphere of uncertainty that's around you. And that's, in a lot of circumstances, that's all you can do. Obviously, you want to make sure that you follow Lori Ellis and her contributions to the community. So you're up to speed on these things. Um, but, you just have to be prepared to react in this atmosphere where almost everything is reactive.
Yeah, and that's so well put. One thing I will just add on is the other thing that's becoming sort of the topic du jour is onshoring, right? And that's coming in a variety of flavors, not just the tariff flavor, but in case you didn't know, the NDAA included the Biosecure Act. It's back. It's going to be signed into law this week.
Yep.
And so all of a sudden, it doesn't have the same list of companies of concern that it used to, but there's various lists floating around and a process to be put on the list. And so even though there's a long timeline for implementation in the biotech and life sciences area, that 5-year timeline, this is when you're picking your commercial partner for 5 years from now. So this is going to have immediate effect. And so this is definitely something to watch pretty closely.
When I was looking up the Biosecure, it was interesting because 35% of deals in 2025 were Chinese biotech and pipelines. And then, so now understanding that this is back on the table, and we also know that there's some manufacturing companies out there that have been questioned in the past. When you're trying to find those partners for the next 5 years and you've already engaged, legally, what do you do? Yeah. Hey, Colin, that's an easy question. Have it.
Oh, now I get the hard ones. Well, I mean, the answer is easy. You have to follow the law. I think there's a couple. Okay, so all right, fine, but that doesn't really answer your question. Is, well, what if the law puts us in an impossible situation? And I'm a fan of never thinking that there's an impossible situation. You just have to figure out, how do we change the rules so that we can now do things. And so some of that, as classified and give it, okay, the act passes, but we don't yet know what countries are involved. So there's an opportunity there to lobby and carve outs, right? I think one thing you see from this administration is that where there is effective lobbying, all of a sudden we see carve outs. And I think that's why when you look at the recent hires, more so than it's always the case when administrations change, that people leave an administration, and that people go into lobbying, right? But what we have seen more than I can remember in my 30 plus years of work is that folks with ties to the existing administration are leaving to go become lobbyists. And those folks are getting hired because people realize that the way you get your carve out is that you hire somebody's buddy and they then have the in this administration. That's the way that it works. And, that's just the reality of it. So if you have lobbied on the Biosecure Act and lost, don't give up, because there's implementation. Whether that's in a regulatory sense, whether it's sub-regulatory, don't give up. You're just going to fight on a different platform and explain what it is that is the issue. And at that point, then you may get some relief.
And I totally agree with everything you said, Colin. So my firm actually has a huge lobbying wing, as you probably know, from Lori's previous podcast, my partner's been on. And one thing I would say with the Biosecure Act is implementation is everything. Countries, specific companies, but there's also a way to structure your deals, right? So one way to structure your deals early on, now when you're trying to pick up Chinese biotech, Biosecure is really looking at not letting money flow back to the Chinese government after the 5 years, implementation period. So you're going to have to figure out a way to sort of buy the product and not license the product, or some kind of license with an option to buy, or some other way so that you can still comply with the law, is one way to do it. And another way to do it in terms of biomanufacturing, it's going to be a little bit trickier. A lot of these products are approved on a Wuxi cell line, and getting new FDA approval is very difficult if you have to switch your cell line. So to Colin's point, lobby, 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 and see if you can get an exemption for your product or for your cell line or for this cell line or whatever it is that you need, because implementation is everything. The devil's in the details.
And related to that, though, I mean, understand, and this because Anne makes a great point. It's like, lobby, but what are you lobbying? It's like, oh, if understand that if this passes, this thing, which is really important to these 5 other things, it's not us, it's downstream, and those folks are your friends, and it's going to hurt them. So you've got to be able to tell that larger story, which relates back. I am not a lobbyist, but I did work with one of our colleagues who did, and he always stressed on how important it was to talk about the real life impacts. Right? It's not that it was never enough that I can make a phone call, but you've got to have a story with that. And so this is the time. What's your story? Why is my product, whatever I'm doing, so important? Find the tear-jerking story that somebody somewhere is not going to get this life-saving treatment. That's effective lobbying. That's part of it. And that's part of arguing on the merits that real people are going to be impacted if we don't have some exception for this. And that's in addition to doing all the right things in terms of structuring your deal in a way that it's as immunized as it can be from the legislation. But if worse comes to worse, have that story ready that, little Johnny is going to not be able to get his life-sustaining treatment if this happens. And we've seen some of that already with some legislation that people pointed out. It came up with the NIH research. The issue with the way it's different from the NIH issues is that is in some way really basic research, which is still incredibly important that somebody do basic research, but it's removed from being able to point to specific patients and say there's going to be a one-to-one impact. It's more saying, all right, future cures are going to be slowed down because we don't have the NIH research. Okay, I mean, I get that. It's important, but it's not as heartrending as when you can point to specific patients who are going to be impacted.
And do you have anything else to add? Because I think you're nodding.
Well, the story is really it. It's the Lin-Manuel Miranda at Hamilton, right? Who's going to tell your story, and it's got to be compelling. So I agree with everything he said. You can't just call it someone. You need to have real life tied impacts to. Little Johnny is the great lead candidate, but he should be amongst a small little army of little Johnnies saying this whole group of people is going to be negatively impacted, and you don't want to be on the 6 o'clock news for this. This is not the way that you want to go. And that would include the administration and also your members of Congress and the Senate.
And way to get Hamilton in here. Fantastic. And it is, and Hamilton, he knew who lives, who dies, who tells your story. That's what it comes down to.
So we've talked about control. And so I want to talk a little bit about AI and the freedom that is being given now to AI companies, which seems contradictory to how Europe is handling AI. And for the audience, I'm sure you're aware, and if you're not, in Europe, they've had orders where they're really cracking down on the use of AI, and anything that is considered high risk, they want to have as much regulation of it as possible. In the United States, previously, I've had conversations where it's almost like the Wild West here. And I want to talk a little bit about the regulation, the changes, and then go from there.
I'm happy to start on that. I mean, we have, just this week, President Trump's executive order basically saying there shall be no, not no, but anything that's going to interfere with AI. I think burdensome is the magic word. Um, I'm preempting all that. Now, we will have litigation to follow that, but it's clearly, consistent with what you've said, Lori, which is the position of this administration is by and large hands off on AI regulation, which is dramatically different from the EU. Although the EU has pulled back from the extreme positions that it was at because it realized it was getting its clock cleaned, that people were not doing AI development in the EU because they thought it would be slowed down by the regulatory environment, and they went to the US or they went to China. So there has been, and I think somewhat unusual for the EU, a recognition of reality in the regulatory state, and that they've had some more success when they've pulled back from it. I think that's the atmosphere we're going to have in the US, at least for the next 3 years. I will say, and this is something that I think people don't recognize as much. Look at the example of cryptocurrency and move forward to AI. Crypto actually wanted to be regulated. The big players in crypto wanted to be regulated because it legitimized them. And if you have one set of regulations at the federal level, that we can figure that out. Okay, here's the regulations. Boom. Now, and when you're regulated, now all of a sudden you're in somebody's 401k, right? So the market opens up. I think AI is in the same position. They're going to want to be regulated. It's going to be the regulation they want to be regulated, but it's going to show, oh yeah, we're responsible people. You're good to implement AI wherever you're at. It's going to be fine. And it takes off and it goes into even more applications. So, and we've seen this example in other things where, because I think there is an important underlying point. 50 state regulation of anything is a mess and will impair innovation. I go back, because I'm old, to HIPAA. All right, HIPAA passed in 1996. And specifically, I'm thinking about the privacy, security elements, as well as administrative simplification, those elements of HIPAA. There's a whole lot else in there. But leading up to that, you had 50 states and 50 different sets of rules, and health information could not travel from state to state any more than if you had different widths of railroad tracks in each state. You're like, you get to the border and you stop, and everybody's got to unload and you got to get on a different train. It was a terrible way to do things. And there was the realization that if we could have one set of rules, a good set of rules, not perfect by any means, but a good set of rules, that would allow information to flow freely, and innovation would come from that, right? And what have we seen in the 30 years now since then? Enormous innovations with electronic health records. Are they perfect? No. But people have said, all right, I got one set of rules. I know what they are. Now I can develop tools to work within that setting. If you give regulatory certainty to AI with a set of rules that define here's where you can go and here's where you can't, then that same sort of innovation will take off, and it will actually remove some barriers.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the US is trying very hard to remove barriers to innovation here. They've changed the patentability rules, which was a big deal in the last month. They're looking at changing it by statute, but they've certainly changed at the implementation and agency level. And your comment, Colin, about train tracks is just 100% on point here, right? How are you possibly going to get something that's a national, international, global tool to work if it has to work differently in every state, right? Emissions testing in California, you can put something on the cars that are going to California, but you can't put something on your AI that's in California and also the other 50 states and 100 countries. It's just absolutely not possible. So, and the train tracks are so funny. As a New Yorker, we have two sets of gauges in our tracks and two widths of the tunnel. And so all the trains can't go on all the tracks here. And it has made it a logistical nightmare for over 100 years. So smoothing this out is definitely the only way that anything's going to happen.
Right. and this may or may not be true, but I think I've heard it that in Europe, the countries would actually have different gauges to keep other countries from invading them and using the trains, right? So it really is these sort of border barriers will slow down innovation. So there is a good to come of something national. Now, it's one thing to say, all right, no state regulation, but there's still this vacuum. And if if the plan, if there is a plan, if the plan is okay, we're going to stop the states from doing stuff, and then we're going to have a national regulation, a regulatory scheme around AI. Seems like a pretty good plan. I don't have enough insight to know whether that's actually the plan or if that will develop. But I think most people say, yeah, AI needs guardrails, it needs regulation. It has a lot of power to it, and so it would be appropriate that it be regulated responsibly, and then that vulnerable people are protected, consumers are protected, that sort of thing. And the hard part is with it, I think for a lot of us is, we realize nobody really understands how it all works, and that's a pretty scary thing. And I say this as somebody who uses AI, every day in my practice. We have our, and Brownstein probably has it too, and it's a great tool. But when you use it and get learned, it has limitations. It gets stuff wrong. And I guess I shouldn't say it too loud because it's going to come back and get me someday, I suppose. I'm bad mouthing the AI. But it is a scheme that needs to be regulated. And I think the responsible players, and I think industry by and large, is saying, yeah, we need regulation.
And I'll just link that back a little bit to biotech. I mean, I'm sure you remember when genetic engineering first became a thing,
Mhm.
right? And people were like, oh my God, we can do designer babies, we can do all these things because, on the one hand, it was, hey, let's genetically engineer out this horribly crippling genetic disease, right? And then it became like, wow, I want my kids to be tall. I think we can do that. And so before we went way down a dark, dark path over there, we, implementation and rules came up about what you can do with it, what you cannot do with it. And not all countries did it at the same time, but functionally, that's what's kind of happened globally now. Sort of the medical ethics of it have come into play. And I think for AI, it's a little bit analogous, except that AI is like thinking and learning and thinking of ways to evade us in this way, right? So it's kind of like letting your toddler out into the neighborhood, and we'll see what happens there. So they'll make mistakes, and they're going to learn some things, and eventually they'll learn to dodge us. But we'll see what happens for now.
So you speak about globally, and I agree. 50 states having all like 50 different regulations, it just doesn't make sense. But you also have countries struggling with AI, and it is a tool, and I think people forget that, a tool that has to be regulated. How do you advise companies to follow the United States, which it seems to be hold my beer if you're driving a car, um, or the EU, where it's like, let me give you a tricycle first, and then we'll teach you how to drive a car. How do you actually level those out? Hey, Colin, what's
Uh,
going on?
yeah,
You're getting all the hard ones.
yeah, give me the hard ones. I was, anyways, um, I can only speak to what, I'm working now with clients who are implementing AI, and they're responsible clients, and they want our help in developing policies and procedures, and we're doing training. So it is, in some respects, it's compliance 101. You go back to first principles on these sort of things, and you make sure that people are trained and that they have oversight, and then they're not just going off and doing stuff. And I think that gets you a lot of the way there for this. There are of course going to be um, unknowns that we're going to find out about and go, oh, I guess we should have been working on that. But the standard in compliance is never omniscience. It's do what's reasonable. So you do your homework, you figure out, what are the likely outcomes, and let's work within that so that we wind up in a reasonably good place. But there will always be the unexpected, um, and these things, you just don't. There's just stuff that you never count on happening, and will lead to. And here in Boston, I think the classic example of that, and it's been getting a little bit of press lately, is the Great Molasses Flood. Have you ever heard of the Great Molasses Flood?
I
Happened
want to.
during. Oh yeah, it's
I also want to hear about
it,
pelicans again.
uh, it's the Great Molasses Flood happened during World War One, and in the north end of Boston, the famous North End, the Italian section of town. There was an enormous tank storing molasses. It's like, what? People were baking cookies or what? No, no, no. You would make alcohol, which was used, military grade alcohol, which was used for a bunch of stuff. And I was thinking about it because it's this time of year. In January of I think it was 1918, it got crazy hot, unusually warm. Things expand when they get warm. The molasses tank blew up, flooded the north end with molasses. People were killed. Nobody thought it could ever. It's like it's a tank of molasses. What? What? There's no problem here, right? People didn't think about these other things that could happen, and to this day, people swear that when you walk in the North End, if you're not smelling spaghetti sauce, that you can sometimes smell the molasses still. Which is a story to say what we do now with AI and regulation and try to anticipate is to try to avoid an explosion that will have ramifications for 100 years. You know, that's that's the analogy there. So I brought it back. I know you were probably worried. It's like, where is he going with the molasses thing? Um, and so, it's that serious though, because it is that powerful with the potential for the unexpected to occur. And so it is important that we take steps now to prevent that. And I think everybody who's in a responsible position regarding AI thinks the same.
Yeah, and I'm going to pick up the molasses thing because A, it's cool, and B, word on the street is that during the big dig, a lot of the construction workers noticed that the ground still smelled like molasses once you got underneath the surface.
Right.
So it's that foundational, it's there forever really thing. And so as we're sort of at the ground floor, maybe now we're at the first floor of AI, working to make sure that we build the right foundation now is going to be critically important for the forever.
Right. Because this is going to get built into things that are built and then sent off to do things. And, how do you reel it all back in at that point? And we see it in other areas of law, you see what happens. Think about an environmental law. Uh, you know, People used to just throw stuff on the ground, right? And then, guess what? That winds up to be a Superfund site that we spend years and years and billions cleaning up because they didn't do it the right way to begin with, because people just didn't think about it. They thought, yeah, I'll just throw some stuff back there. Um, and yeah, I have the book on my shelf, A Civil Action, uh, which is the story of exactly what happens when you throw stuff in an area and then they're neighbors, and then maybe it's a cancer cell, and you know, and people think, wow, it could have all been avoided. So that's what we're trying to avoid here. We're trying to avoid a problem that I may not live to see, but that's going to come up because this is going to get built into things. And then how do we undo it? We dodged a bullet, a technological bullet. Again, I'm showing my age, with Y2K. Everybody thought, oh, that's it. The machines are going to stop working. The elevators won't run. Are you ready? I don't know. And I don't know about Brownstein. We had a Y2K practice group. We were ready, and we advised people on things to do to get ready. And it turned out to be a whole lot of nothing. Um, this is not that. This is so not that.
Yeah, and I'm just going to follow on. I will say I was an epidemiologist during Y2K, and I worked at the New York City Department of Health where they had, I kid you not, one computer with internet that we all had to share because we all had our own desktop. So Y2K was definitely front and center, but I think even sort of, as you said, it's built into things. A great kind of modern day example is the Internet of Things, right? Like
Right.
I've bought, uh, I had to buy a new washing machine to my absolute chagrin because the one from 1985 finally died,
Mm.
right? And so that washing machine has like an app and it does all these things, and I just needed to wash the clothes. And so somebody thought this was a really great idea. My machine can talk to me and let me know how it's doing. Fantastic. I need more alerts. But what people didn't think about with all of these internet enabled appliances is this very weird side effect from domestic abuse, where so and so is not in the house or they've got a restraining order, but they have access to all the apps and they can turn the heat off or turn the lights on or sort of do all of these different things. No one thought about it when they thought it'd be nice if my washing machine would send me a little notification that it's done when I'm in the other room. But all of a sudden, the outside is inside the house and you don't expect it in way to be used in these ways. So that law of unintended consequences is real and pervasive.
Yeah. And it's so we went from everything is connected to the internet to now everything is AI enabled, even though it doesn't need to be. Try and where we're seeing it more and more. And a classic thing that I deal with in the cybersecurity space is your vendors, right? And so and then you got to know, well, what are our vendors doing and what are they using? Because we're only as safe as our vendors are because we're letting them into our systems and they're making representations. Um, and so, it's scary stuff. Just try to do a simple internet search without using AI. You just have to start turning stuff off because now everything is defaulted to it. And it's built into everywhere and you don't know it. And you don't know which undercurrents they are. And so if there's a problem with something, it's hard to diagnose why it happened. So again, these are simple ideas and the EU has figured this out. You can have optionality. Switch. Do I consent to having AI on? Yes, no. All right, like cookies. That seems pretty simple. You could do that. Am I going to disclose to you what AI I'm using? That seems pretty clear. We know how to do this. We know how to have terms of use. We know how to have privacy policies. We know how to do these sort of things. And I think you're starting to see that. One of the things, and bringing it back to the healthcare and life science, one of the debates that I'm having with clients is clients are asking me, should we ask people to consent to our use of AI in their treatment? And there was recently, I can't remember if it was in JAMA or the New England Journal of Medicine, so I apologize to whichever one it was in. I can't remember. But there was a back and forth about, what's the right way to go? Should you ask for consent or not? With the idea that, well, okay, it's always nice to ask for consent, except asking for consent may actually cause people to not want AI used when it could be really helpful for them because they think, oh, if I have to consent to this, there must be some reason why I wouldn't consent to it. And therefore it would feed some irrational AI bias, anti-AI bias. And I thought, all right, I hadn't really thought about that, but all right. Um, Overall, I've come to the conclusion that I don't think that clinicians need to ask permission to use it. It's part of the overall, but it should be part of an overall explanation because it's just one of the tools. Anymore though, and say, well, you know, and I also don't think that letting people necessarily opt out is a good idea because, for the same way you're going to wind up with some balkanized way of treating people. There will inevitably be providers for almost everything where you can go, they don't use AI and say, fine, I'm just going to go to that provider. Um, in the same way that you could say, well, if I want my gallbladder out, I could have an open procedure or I could have it done laparoscopically. It just depends which way I prefer. Okay, that's fine. So if I want to go in and let's say, and I see this come up a lot in mental health treatment, I would like a mental health provider to use AI to help treat me, and I want a chat bot that I'm going to be able to talk to. Great, that's your choice. Or I can go to a classic Freudian and receive my mental health care there, and we're not going to have a chat bot. I'm just going to sit on a couch. That's fine too. That seems to me way that up front you're telling people how you're providing the care, but you're not asking consent for specific sort of modalities or involvement in the care.
Is there anything that you feel companies, CEOs, investors should be particularly aware of for this upcoming year, which perhaps maybe they're not focusing on, or it's not getting as much media as attention as it should?
I mean, it's, to steal from Colin shamelessly, actually, everything, everywhere, all at once is literally what it feels like right now in every industry. So I think it's less of a, what of the 6,000 fires are you not aware of? And more of a, okay, what three are you going to focus on this year? Because you can't put out all the fires. There's no way to plan even 10 steps ahead. I view this as sort of, walking into a pond and the bottom is muddy and quickly the water gets murky. So you can take a couple of steps, but then it's really hard to plan. And I've heard this from a lot of clients that really all they want are rules of the road. They don't even care what they are at this point. They just want business certainty so they can plan for, they're not even at 2026. They're like the first quarter. Can we get through the whole first quarter without the floor dropping out from under us? And I will say that, some big things that you need to focus on, I would say, figuring out if you use research funding, figuring out your funding source and starting to seek alternative sources just in case. If you don't use, federal funding for your things, I would start to focus on your supply chain, right? Are you getting a lot of things from overseas? Or there's going to be more fluctuations in tariffs? I'm sure that they've been thinking about that a lot this year, but it's time to maybe think about, if you can't supply from in the United States or from some of the aligned countries, whatever those are these days, to Colin's point earlier, figure out an exception. It does look like the administration is willing to make a deal with people that it knows. So let's think about that. So focus on your supply chain, focus on your funding source. And also, I would say it's really critically important. We're 1 year into 4 years. We've got 3 years to go. And if you don't have people to talk to the administration for you and with you, you got to get those people in line. It's so critical in every administration, but this particular administration is so much more important, I'd say.
So I'm going to say two things that folks should do, and it feeds on what Ann's talking about. Sort of, we have, to use Secretary Rumsfeld's phrase, we have the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns, and we've got a lot of unknown unknowns right now. So what do you do to prepare for a world like Ann correctly describes? I say two things: talk to your tax advisor, and get totally on top of the tax changes that are coming in 2026. That are being implemented. I think people still don't recognize how massive they are, and they are really massive. And secondly, talk to your insurance agent and say, for all the other things that are in the environment, for AI and cyber and the changes in employment law, am I appropriately insured for those? And I know this sounds really like boring, and we've talked about all this great stuff, and now I'm talking about taxes and insurance. But those are fundamental things that you can do something about. And you should be thinking about it. You probably should think about them every year. But these years, of uncertainty are particularly good times to go back and look, because what happens I'll talk about the insurance space first, is when things change, insurance companies say, oh, no, that's the old policy. That doesn't cover that anymore. We're not to go that new thing. You signed up for something else. We don't cover that. You need a rider for that. And you start making case law on these things, and people find out the hard way. And then again, you can't properly plan any kind of company until you know what the tax ramifications of your business are. And so I think spending some time with that would pay good dividends. And I know in both there's a lawyer involved, so I'm just a little bit self-interested in this, but I think those are good things to do.
I'm just going to tack on one more for Collins. Extremely important and unfun list, which is look at your force majeure clauses,
Mhm.
because I know see he agrees it's so unfun that Colin and I are on the same page per usual. But what's so critical about that is over this last year, particularly supply agreements, what constitutes force majeure? Like, hey, moving tariffs up to 400%, does that constitute force majeure? Who's supposed to pay those? And so you remember during COVID, this became an issue because epidemics were never included in force majeure before, but now they're standard practice. So I've seen language in contracts, I've certainly put language in contracts to account for sudden changes in import rules, which seem totally unnecessary in 2024 and are totally critical in 2025.
Wow.
Yeah, force majeure. It's like the lowest of the boilerplate contract clauses. But I was literally looking at one yesterday because I thought, okay, is this going to cover everything we need? And it's the hardest thing to do because we don't, it's the unknown unknowns. And, some lawyer after I'm gone may be looking at that going, boy, he did a great job, hopefully. Or, oops, he didn't see that one coming. But I'll be gone by then.
And I will say the Europeans universally strike out the words act of God, which is in the US contract. And so
Right.
it's this really hysterical thing where like there's an international disconnect on this. And so then there's a disagreement about what that means. And also tariffs probably aren't covered by acts of God,
Yeah.
theoretically speaking.
Well,
So, with that, I have one more question for the both of you, actually, perhaps
Yep.
two. What is the most difficult challenge that you've had in your career? And it could be anything. It could be switching law firms. It could be a case that you just were surprised about.
I, I'm going to try and be mindful here. Um, but I will say that um, as a lawyer, probably the most surprising thing to me, because I went to law school as a second career, was yeah, there are rules, but those rules are so devil in the details applied. So, for example, we come up with these patent laws. So let's take the practice that I'm in the most, right? And so we're sitting there saying this is a patent, this is an invention, this is new, and we're arguing very complicated science and very complicated esoteric um, areas in a very esoteric area of law, but it is the district court judges and the USPTO that have to keep up with innovation, and Congress, by its very nature, the body most able to bring in experts and hear testimony and do all the things, is extremely slow to adapt to new technology, leaving the judges and the USPTO to be really at the forefront of the law here and sort of making these very complicated determinations. And that was the most surprising thing to me about being something as boring as a patent lawyer for the first half of my career.
Colin.
Yeah, I guess it's actually something I'm working on right now because it's a case that in one way or another has been alive. As of the first year, it'll be 20 years. Some aspect
Wow.
of a case going on for that long. And I don't like losing, but I don't
Can't
like
tell.
losing in particular for the wrong reasons. And there have been a number of times in the case where I feel like, we were, that my client did things right and that we did things right, and yet the system is not recognizing that. Um, and although I've been doing this a long time, that still bothers me. That deep down, I have a sense of sort of what's right and what's wrong. And I think I'm big enough to acknowledge sometimes that clients do things wrong and that there'll be consequences of that. And my job is to minimize those. But when you get decisions in this case or any other case where you go, oh, that's just not right. Um, how and how you have to then explain to the client who says, how did that happen? Because you told me what the law is, and that's not what the law is. It's like, I know, and then that's why they have appeals. And hopefully they get it right at the next level, but even that doesn't happen all the time. And so coming to grips with the fact that there are, in the larger sense, wrongs that won't be righted, uh, that's the hardest part about this particular career that I have.
Yeah, I can definitely empathize. I can empathize with you because I have that. If it's wrong, if you do wrong, it's wrong. But if you're doing right, well, then good things should happen. So I have that as well. And then one last question, and I promise I'll let you go. And it's just as easy as all the other ones.
Yeah. Right. Hang on here.
I know. All right, let's go.
Get a grip.
What made you choose this career? And particularly with your focus and emphasis on cybersecurity and life sciences, because they're so easy industries as a whole. See, easy.
Easy
Whoever would
peasy.
like to go first.
I'll go. Because well, it starts, if you want to talk back to the beginning, and it's a story that my mother would tell. Listen, from the time I was 12, I wanted to be a lawyer, which probably made me a really boring kid. But I told people I want to be able to argue and get paid for it. So here I am.
So
Awesome.
I
That's
guess I
noble,
have
actually.
it is
Yeah, really high
like
principle to me, right? After I gave you that other answer about righting wrongs and all that, it's like, nah, this is what he's about.
which I love actually. So law is my second career, and so I came about it obviously in a much less disciplined way than Colin did for sure. So I was working for the state of New York as an epidemiologist, in veterinary and pest control, and I'd like to put this into every single interview I'm ever in because I was once rat queen of New York City. Um, and so I put that in every interview just because it's my personal trademark and brand.
Hmm.
So my my little brother, um, I say that somewhat facetiously, he's quite tall, but my little brother was in law school as his second career. And he was trying to tell me, he was talking to me about his classes, and we were driving home from wherever we were. And I was asking him all these questions. He said, wow, these are really good questions. I think you might really like law school. And I was like, no. I'd gotten into Columbia to do my PhD. I was going to go further down Nerdville. And I was really happy in Nerdville. And he said, there's this thing called patent law where you can learn the newest science before it even publishes. And I was like, I don't know where he picked this up, because let me just be clear, he's not a science nerd. And he was like, just take the LSAT, give it a try, see what you think. So I deferred my PhD for a year, took the LSAT, went to law school, and loved the fact that someone pays me to learn the latest science every day. How cool is that?
That's pretty amazing, actually.
Yeah.
Why do you think I do what I do? I get to talk to people who are far more intelligent than I am, and I
Same.
get to learn everything that what you're doing, what concerns you, and then I get to take that knowledge and talk to somebody else and see how that connects.
Mhm.
It's pretty amazing, honestly. And
Right.
sometimes I get paid to argue with people too, so that's fun.
There you go. Well,
So,
we're all lucky to be able to do what we do.
yeah. Well, those are my questions. I think we covered everything. Um, I would like to thank Colin and Anne
Mhm.
for being here, Anne Lee, excuse me, for being here today. It was a wonderful conversation. Thank you.